What is up, everyone? I am TST's the Mudman, and it's time to figure out what we are going to play this weekend in Gods Unchained. We are on GUDecks.com looking at the Mythic meta over the past 7 days, and as you can see, we've got Magic as the most popular god. We've been doing this video series for a little over 6 months now, and it is very rare for a non-nature god to be the most popular, so that's always cool, and it makes a lot of sense. Magic has a lot of viable archetypes, all of them are very strong. Our second most popular god is Nature, which is generally like very aggressive, regen, or just pure aggro nature. Deception, like Magic, can go in many different directions. However, the most common one you'll see on ladder is probably some sort of aggressive deception, maybe with like some guild flavor on top. But deception can also be very successful with control or with like an anti-meta mid-range type thing. Death is still a very strong god, despite the fact that it is the fourth most popular, and you'll probably be running into mostly Anubian death decks, maybe a board wipe death, but Anubian death is definitely the strongest death archetype. Light is generally pretty simple. 9 times out of 10, they will be, Zoo Light, playing creatures, buffing the creatures, essentially just a worse version of aggro nature. But every once in a while, you will run into Control Light, and spoiler alert, the light deck we'll be looking at today will be a Control Light list. And then we've got War, the least popular god. War is generally like mid-range relic-centric war. Like they use their blitz creatures to control the board state, and then eventually they create a huge relic with the unrestrained power and kill their opponent. But now that we have discussed the meta a bit, let's jump into some specific deck lists you might want to play over the weekend. Alright, so let's start things off with the most popular and most powerful god, Magic. Today I've got a record 3 different Magic decks to show you, so we're going to go over all 3 of them fairly quickly. The first one is Control Magic. Control Magic has been extremely popular this past week. It was all over the top 20 the last weekend ranked event. It was not the best performing Magic deck over the weekend. That was Tempo Magic. But we should probably start the conversation with Control Magic, because this is the one that's sort of like affecting the meta the most. So the deck is fairly simple. It's essentially just various board clears at different mana costs, and then big AOE board clears, and then big front lines. So, even bigger front lines here in the neutral slot with the Healing Elite and the City Planner. And the idea behind this deck is it's really good against Aggressive Nature. Aggressive Nature was the most popular god last week. It's the second most popular god this week, but it's only about 0.9% less popular than Magic. So you'll be running into lots of Nature over the weekend, and all the nature decks just trying to play creatures and then buff creatures, so you can kill their creatures very successfully with all of your board control cards, and then the big sweeps, and then play front lines and completely lock them out of the game. So this deck is extremely good against those aggressive nature decks, which are very, very popular. And that brings us to Aggro Magic, which is also favored against tempo nature decks. This deck was made by a couple of question marks, but and this was the best performing archetype of last week. And the reason why this performed better than the Control Magic archetype is this is less good against nature than Control Magic, but this is very favored against Control Magic. Because Control Magic, controls the board in the early game, then has big AoEs and hides behind front lines, as we discussed. Tempo Magic doesn't capitalize on their big board states, though. They deal a little bit of chip damage with their creatures in the early game, and then they finish off their opponent with some spell boost plus, cheap spells, and maybe not so cheap spells for like lots of burst damage. So since Magic, or Control Magic rather, doesn't have any healing, Tempo Magic can chip them down and then burst them from over the top, so it's very good in that matchup. It's also pretty favorable against Nature, because you're capable of some really big AoE turns. Let's see, we've got the Unannounced Arrival, which can of course be cheapened with Arcane Transcendent. However, your biggest board clear cards are going to be Arcane Transcendent in combination with Unbound Flames. If you, reduce the cost of Unbound Flames with the Arcane Transcendent, it becomes a 3-mana spell with Empower 2, which means for 5 mana you can use the Empower effect to deal 5 damage and 5 damage to all creatures, which will essentially just win the game on the spot against those nature opponents, clearing their entire board state. And then, since you're Magic, you can draw lots of cards, generate lots of cards, and then overwhelm them. And then, as we discussed, since Control Magic has no healing, all the burst damage and spell boost guys can just get you over the top on that. So if you want to perform the best this weekend, you should probably go with some sort of Tempo Magic deck, like a couple of question marks here. But that is not the last magic deck to discuss. We've also got Combo Magic. This is the 1 health combo magic deck made by Mirage. We discussed this deck and this archetype a couple of weeks ago, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago on this series. The combo is fairly simple. You play 2 spell-slinging teachers, and then all 4 of your Academy Apprentices, which are 1 mana 1/1s with Echo and Spell Boost +1. Those 6 creatures equate to 18 damage to face. And then you play a Form of Unity, which you have reduced to 0 with either your Helpful Aether Fox or an even better Form of Wisdom. The Form of Unity deals the remaining 12 damage. It deals 13 damage since all of your apprentices have Spell Boost. But the fact of the matter is, it is a 5 mana, sometimes 4 mana combo that deals 30 damage to your opponent's face. I almost forgot to mention the Dimension Door, which is another part of the combo. 1 Dimension Door has to hit 1 of the 1 mana creatures. It can be a Spell-Slinging Teacher or an Academy Apprentice, doesn't matter which one. That makes the combo 5. If you don't hit a Dimension Door, the combo becomes 6, which is probably too slow. But if you hit both Dimension Doors on 1 mana creatures, then you can do the combo for 4, which is extra powerful. Let's see, other important cards of note are the Iron-Tooth Goblin. As we saw in the Control Magic list, the Magic Talismans are very popular, and the Talisman single-handedly beats this deck, so when you play against Control Magic, you're going to want a hard mulligan for your Iron-Tooth Goblin, and you're not going to want to blow up your entire deck with Lost in the Depths until you find one of these goblins, so that you can block out your opponent's counter if you're playing against those Control Magic decks. And that brings us to Lost in the Depths, which is probably the most important card in the deck. As you can see from the curve, we have 20 cards here that cost 2 mana, and that is premeditated. The idea is to hard mulligan for Lost in the Depths, play a 2 mana creature, or maybe your opponent has played a 2 mana creature, and then you blow up your entire deck besides that combo we discussed, and then you can cycle through your deck quickly with your card draw as well as your Clear Mind God Power to consistently get your combo out on 5 mana and destroy your opponent. So any Magic deck you go with, whether it be the combo, the tempo, or the control, Magic is super powerful this week. Any Magic deck should be strong, and if you don't go with Magic, you should definitely have a plan for what you're going to do against Magic. But that is about it for the most popular god. Let's jump into the next one. Alright, next up we have the second most popular god in Nature. This is an aggressive Nature list made by Chachki. This absolute gamer made this aggressive Nature deck. And in all honesty, I don't really recommend playing Nature this week. It's the second most popular god, and this player, as well as 90 other players, have played this exact list for 90 games with a 71% win rate, so that's quite good. But we just talked about Magic for a while, and the main reason why Magic is so good is because their most popular archetypes are so favored against aggro Nature. So you'll be swimming against the tide a bit if you run aggro Nature. That being said, this is a very nice list. It's extremely aggressive. So if any Nature deck is going to get underneath like a Control Magic deck, it's going to be one like this. As you can see, we have a lot of very powerful 1-mana cards, 2 copies of Best Friends, 2 Marshwalkers, 2 of the Howlers for some small AoE buffs in the early game, 2 Beetles, the recently wildified Finian Fruitbear, Dagon, of course, Nature's staple. It got sort of nerfed a week ago. It didn't really matter. It's still incredibly good. Let's see, what else do we have over here? We've got a copy of Revivification, which fills up your board a little bit and combos so nicely with Dagon. Then we've got 2 copies of Sing Song Satyr for even more buff power. 3 mana, 3/3 wild creature, buffs your friendly creatures +1 attack. This card is super strong. And essentially you're just buffing your board the entire turn. You have your Howler into your Sing Song Satyr, into your Wildfire, and then maybe with a Sudden Bloom to top it off, and then lots of cheap creatures in the mid-game. We even have a copy of Bladefly for a single board and 1 card. And one weird thing of note for this deck is, as you can see, we have 1 copy of Sudden Bloom and 1 copy of the Hunt. Maybe the pilot of the deck is testing. He doesn't know which one he likes more, the Hunt or Sudden Bloom. Maybe it's because, Sudden Bloom is probably better against... Sudden Bloom is probably better against most things. I can see the Hunt being better against Control Magic. It doesn't matter. Both cards are pretty good. They cost 6 mana. They essentially clear the board. Sudden Bloom also buffs a creature, but it's harder to pull off. Like we said in the beginning, I'm not 100% sure Nature is the best choice to go with. However, I know that a lot of people love playing nature, a lot of people main nature, and if you want to go with nature this week, I think a very aggressive list like this one could be a great choice for you. Now let's move on to Nakarob's Control Deception list. This deck is extremely similar to the Control Deception list we talked about last week, except for with one major difference. This list has 2 Demogorgons instead of just 1, which I am very happy about. I hate it when decks only run 1 demo, it hurts my head. This deck has remedied that, it has 2 demos, and it's still just a good anti-meta archetype. We've got the 2 Bound by Her Wills in here, which are really, really great against Anubian Death. You can use your cards like Shadow Step Backstabber to reduce one of those important Anubians' attack from 2 to 1 and then take control of it forever. It's also particularly good against Tempo Magic. Tempo Magic decks often run All-Seeing Spires and Vortimers, and Bound by Her Will is really good for stealing those. This deck also runs a copy of Counterfeit, which is also very good against Magic. The Tempo Magic decks have Palace's Wand, and stealing a Palace's Wand is amazing, and the Control Magic decks have the Magic Talisman, and stealing a Magic Talisman is also pretty good. Then, of course, we have Cutthroat Insight, which you can use to steal, whatever big expensive beat stick your Control Magic player, has to end the game with, or stealing a Land of the Dead or something from your Anubian Death opponent. Cutthroat Insight is just a pretty good card in general right now. It's really bad against something like Nature or Light or Aggro Magic because they're being aggressive. But there's a handful of slower decks. I'm including Anubians in the slower deck category for this as well that Cutthroat works with. So Cutthroat is a very decent card in the meta currently. Let's see, we've got 2 copies of Rapture Dance. Pretty self-explanatory. Clears the board. Nature's popular. Clears Nature's board. Simple as that. Let's see, we've got 2 copies of the demo, which I mentioned before, as well as 2 copies of Demo's best friend, Witherfingers, to make lots of sleep turns and heal up a whole bunch, with that demo. Let's see, we've got the Dragon, which can be super big, great for getting in the way of your aggressive Nature and Light opponents. Also just a big beat stick that you can use to destroy your opponent with. Same thing can be said for Helion Elite, although an 8-mana frontline probably won't be very relevant against those aggressive Nature and Light players, but could be really relevant against those Anubian Death players or various Control Magic decks. And then there's Guild Enforcer. Guild Enforcer is just good. Essentially speaking, Control Deception is still very, very powerful. You can go aggressive, you can go full control. This is sort of like half control, half anti-meta, with those Bound by Her Wills and Umber Arrows targeting specifically Anubian Death. Umber Arrow, Bound by Her Will also being good against Tempo Magic. Deception, always a fun god to play. If you don't want to go with Magic, but you do want to go with something a little control-y, then a Deception list like Nakarob's here could be a really fun list for you. And next up, we have Anubian Death. This Anubian Death deck was originally made by J-Rock, but Rakusho piloted it last weekend with 23 wins. It was the best performing Death deck last week. And I think this is a very interesting list, mainly because we've had a balance patch in the past 2 weeks, mainly nerfing this Anubian Death archetype. And Rakusho has changed nothing since the patch. As you can see, this list has played 1,300 games. And not only is this just a completely unmodified Anubian Death deck, this is the style of Anubian Death that was targeted specifically with all of the tech cards. Not only does this Anubian Death deck run the classic Anubian cards like Priestess of Taket as well as Raving Necromancer, which you can target with Gleamweaver to remove from the game entirely. This deck also uses Afterlife cards and capitalizes on them with Canopy Quarter, so this deck is particularly weak to those Gleamweaver-esque cards, and yet it was still the best performing Death archetype. Rakusho proving that you cannot balance the game by adding new cards, you gotta actually balance the gods. So, Death is no longer the best god in the meta anymore, as we've discussed the entire video. It is currently Magic. But if you are a fan of those Anubian Death decks, you can play the old tried and true Sleep Numian variation and perform very well. Like I said, Rakusho played this deck last week, got 23 wins, did extremely well. The games are fairly fast, and people aren't targeting Anubians as hard anymore. Probably going to be seeing a lot of anti-magic decks this week. So Anubian Death could be a great choice for this weekend. Alright, next up we have Control Light. This light list was made by, I believe this is pronounced Ryan, and we've been doing this series for a little over 6 months, and I believe this is the first Control Light list we have ever featured in this series. We showed off Order Light once, but every other time if Light was there, it's always been Zoo Light, so it is extremely refreshing to see this new Light archetype. And Control Light is in a really interesting spot in this current meta, because it has game against pretty much all the different Magic decks except for Combo. Can't really do anything to stop Combo Magic. But it can do well against Control Magic or Tempo Magic, which puts it in a pretty good spot in the meta right now. We also have cards like the Eclipse, which can give Anubian Soulless, making it good in those Anubian matchups. We also have Divine Judgment, which is also really great in those Anubian matchups. If you obliterate a card like Priestess of Taket or Raving Necromancer, it doesn't go to the Void, and therefore it cannot be brought back with Land of the Dead. The same thing can be done with the Eclipse, giving everything Soulless. So we've got a good shot against Anubians, which is very good. And then this deck also has a pretty good amount of healing. We have the Heal God power naturally, so you can heal for 2 every turn if you really want to. And we also have a copy of Helmna, which is, big burst healing the turn you play. It's also incredibly strong with the Heal God power. And then there is a single copy of Demo. Unfortunately, there's not 2, so we're all a little bit sad about that. But the point is, there is a pretty fair amount of healing in this deck. And healing is really good against Tempo Magic. It's hard for them to chip down and then, kill you over 2 turns with burst cards if you can have big AoE heal turns. So you're good against those Magic matchups. When you're playing against Control Magic, you can do normal light stuff, play creatures. Maybe against Control Magic, you pick Summon Acolyte. But you have this infinite value combo in Radiant Embalmer plus Inescapable Duty. Inescapable Duty is a card that doesn't see very much play. It's new. It is a 6-mana spell. You pull a creature from your Void to your hand and give it +7/+7. If you are really feeling spicy, you can empower it 1 and also make it your chosen one. But there's no reason to ever make it your chosen one. You can, of course, take something huge like a Poly or a Demo out of the Void and give it +7/+7. But if you just want to outvalue your opponent guaranteed, you can simply pick your Radiant Embalmer off of the duty, have a giant Radiant Embalmer, play Radiant Embalmer, get the duty back, and rinse and repeat until you inevitably win the game. This deck is weak against the Combo Magic decks, but luckily Combo Magic is the least popular of the 3 Magic archetypes. So if you want to go against the grain and you want to play like a kind of anti-meta deck and something totally brand new with Control Light, I'm not saying for sure that Control Light will be good, but at least in my head it seems like Control Light fits in the meta really well. I guess we can talk about the Nature matchup. Nature is the second most popular god. We've got a pretty good amount of control tools. We, of course, have that Divine Judgment that can obliterate anything. We have the Encourager, which can, neuter creatures attacked, making them Light's Leviable, or just, destroying tiny creatures very slowly. We've got Line in the Sand, which is essentially Super Sleep. Give each enemy creature can attack for 1 turn, so it's like sleep, but they can't be woken up. So, that's super strong and annoying. We have Lips Are Sealed, which, turns off any big nature creature on 5 mana, and on 5 mana, nature has buffed their board multiple times, so all of their creatures will have more than 3 strength, so they'll all be turned off for a turn, and then you can capitalize on all that order with your, Archpriest of Parthene, which might be super mega double big, and you can kill your opponent that way. So essentially speaking, it sort of seems like Control Light is favored against most of the popular archetypes in the meta right now. So this could finally be the week for not Zoo Light. So if you want to, go against the grain, you want a spicy list, this Control Light list by Ryan could be a great choice for you. And the last god to discuss is the least popular god in War. This is a mid-range Relic War list made by Spry Guy. It is very similar to the list we showed off last week, except this list does not have any Soul Survivors. Instead, it has a few more early game AoEs, as well as Ravenous Chimera. And I'm a big fan of the double Ravenous Chimera for this list, as we've been discussing this entire video. Tempo Magic is very good, and Tempo Magic is bad against healing cards. And this deck has quite a bit of healing for a deck that's classified as aggro, according to GU decks. We have the 2 copies of Ravenous Chimera for Leech. There are the 2 copies of Demo for Leech. And then we have the Magic Missile Launchers that heal you for 4 upon their Afterlife triggering. So a pretty fair amount of healing in the deck. So, you definitely got game against those Tempo Magic players. Also, you're pretty good against Nature. Nature is very aggressive. This deck has lots and lots of Blitz creatures as well as relics to control the board. And against these extremely aggressive Nature decks, 1 well-placed Carnage Sweep is often enough to win you the game. The biggest issue with this archetype is control magic or control deception, really just frontline creatures in general. There's a lot of frontline floating around. Guild Enforcer is very popular. That core set Refresh Dragon with Warden frontline is very popular. Control magic has Helion Elites and Labyrinth Guards. There's lots and lots of frontlines floating around. And if your opponent has a frontline creature, it doesn't matter how big and giant your relic becomes, it can't get by the front line. So it's very feast or famine. You should be good against nature. You definitely have game against tempo magic. I'm not sure I would say this is favored against tempo magic, but you definitely have a chance. However, the fact that this whole archetype is pretty much hard countered by frontline, this definitely isn't going to, saying definitely isn't going to be the best performing archetype is, tough to say. But, it's definitely got a big glaring weakness in that frontline thing. That being said, this archetype is really fun. Spry Guy himself has done outstandingly with this deck. He's played 31 games with a 90% win rate. This was the best performing war deck of the last weekend ranked event. And if you do want to go with war over this weekend, then I am a big fan of Spry Guy's list. I think this is the one to go with. Probably not as consistent as Magic, but, what is as consistent as Magic? So let's jump into the conclusion. Alright, so it is conclusion time. We've talked about Magic. We've looked at different Magic decks. What is the conclusion? What should you play this weekend? Well, the answer is obvious. You gotta pick Magic. Any of the Magic decks are good. It can be control. It can be tempo. It can be combo. Magic is the god of the week. But whatever deck you go with, make sure you have fun, tell us how you did in the TST Discord, and have a wonderful day. Hey, you! Did you know that subscribing to the TST YouTube channel will increase your win rate by 6.9%? So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for notifications. And while you're at it, equip Scythe of the Harvest and attack the like button directly in the face. Bye-bye!